Welcome to Marion University. Thank you for coming. A lot of you are students, and I think there's some people that might be new to our speaker series. So let me just tell you a little bit very quickly about what we do before I introduce tonight's speaker. So the Richard Lugar Franciscan Center for Global Studies consists of two components. One is the public speaker series, of which this is part. All of our events are free and open to the public. We have approximately one a month during the academic year. And outside we have brochures for the speaker series, so if you haven't picked one up, please do on your way up. And so this is our speakers. Just to give you a heads up on what's coming up next. On Sunday, December 6th, former Senator Richard Lugar will give his annual Global Studies address. And it's Sunday, December 6th at 7 p.m. here. All of our events will take place in this room. In January, we're bringing in Jeff Smoolian, who is the president and CEO of MS Communication, and he's going to be speaking on the future of global telecommunications. In March, we're bringing in Ambassador Faisal Istrabadi, who is a law professor at IU and also directs a Center for the Study of the Middle East at Indiana University. And he was the former Iraqi ambassador to the United Nations, and he will be speaking on the future of Iraq, and that's in March. And then we will end this year's speaker series in April with Mark Miles, the CEO of Holman & Company, speaking on the Indianapolis 500-mile race, 100 years of global impact. And since most of us live here, you'll know that a month later will be the running of the 100th Indianapolis 500. And that's how we'll sort of end the year in April. Again, all events are free and open to the public. All of our events are followed by a reception where you get to meet the speakers and talk to them. And so please come and tell your friends, the more the merrier. The academic program in Global Studies is the second part of the center, and that's a minor in Global Studies. Several of our raise your hand if you're in the Global Studies program. Oh, terrific. Okay, so you already know it. I don't have to tell you too much about it. So for those of you who are not in the Global Studies program, it's a minor that fits with every major at Marion University. We have students in nursing, in business, in secondary education, in all the liberal arts and sciences, biology, pre-med, all of them minoring in Global Studies, which requires a study abroad experience, an additional year of foreign language study, and specially designed global studies classes. And it's a great value-added package that prepares students for the globalized world no matter what they're majoring in. I take students to Washington, D.C. over spring break for a very intense program in D.C. Where we meet a lot of people, senators and congressmen, go to the World Bank, visit the Chinese embassy, do some other really cool things, and that's one of the perks of being in the program. And then, of course, they also get to meet all of our speakers. So it's those are the two things that we do with the Lugar Franciscan Center for Global Studies. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody if you're interested in the program, if you're interested in perhaps making a contribution. I'd be glad to talk to you about that afterwards as well at the reception. So it is a real honor to introduce tonight's speaker, George Srour. We were talking about this before. George and I had first met maybe about 8-9 years ago when he was just starting Building Tomorrow. And I think he had maybe one school under his belt, and I thought this was a really great idea, and I made a mental note maybe one day he'd really make a good global studies speaker, and I think it's long overdue. Actually, we should have had him a while ago. George is a native of Indianapolis, went to North Central High School, and then went to William and Mary, and the College of William and Mary, where he majored in what we would call political science. It was government and international relations. And a lot of people are always asking me, what can I do with a bachelor's in political science? Well, these are some of the things that you can do with a degree in political science. He went ahead and he is the founder and chief dreamer of Building Tomorrow, which is a non-governmental organization headquartered here in Indianapolis that works in Uganda, and we'll learn all about it tonight. Let me just bring a couple of important points here. At William & Mary, when he graduated, George was awarded the James Monroe Prize for Civic Leadership and the inaugural William Simon Fellowship for Noble Purpose. Using both awards, he started Building Tomorrow in 2005, straight out of college. He is a very successful builder of this program, and so far to date, Building Tomorrow has raised over $7 million, empowering individuals and communities in East Africa to donate over 100 acres of land and volunteer nearly 400,000 hours of labor to build schools for out-of-school children throughout rural Uganda. And he's going to obviously talk about this in great detail. I just want to say a couple of things. He's been recognized for his work in the field of social entrepreneurship. He's been named an Echoing Green Fellow, a member of the Good 100. He was added to the Forbes Magazine 30 Under 30 for social entrepreneurs. And in 2014, he launched with Building Tomorrow Educate 51K, which is a 5-year, $12 million initiative that is aiming at enrolling almost 51,000 out-of-school children by 2019 by constructing 60 primary level schools and recruiting 150 Building Tomorrow fellows in Uganda. And I believe that's part of the Clinton Global Initiative, is that correct? Or it's connected to it? Okay, very good. Very, very impressive and very exciting, and I think it really shows you what someone with motivation can do. And it is, as I say in some of my classes, it actually is possible for a person to change the world and to contribute. And I think we're going to see how that happens tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, George Srour.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Yes. Even all you people sitting in Fishers? As I was saying, I got a chance to take a trip down memory lane. As Dr. Atlas mentioned, I went to the College of William & Mary, where about 12 years ago, Senator Lugar came and spoke to the student body, and they combed the whole campus. They said, we need everybody from Indiana to show up because we want you to take a photo with Senator Lugar. And let's see, whoops. There we are. Everyone across campus came from Indiana, and that's what we ended up with. As you can see, 12 years ago I had hair. And I want to think that it's all been lost as a result of the work that we've been doing in Uganda, so it's for a good cause. But as you'll see later down the line, I'm not so sure that that's actually been the case. I've been asked to speak for about 30 minutes to tell you a little bit about the work that we do in Uganda, which I will do. I also want to talk to you a little bit as well about the challenges that we face in this field, in international development work, particularly education, and then also offer a couple kind of nuggets of wisdom for the students who are in the room as well as you start thinking about what you do after you're here at Marion. So before I make this a slightly interactive talk, don't get too excited, but we are going to engage you, I hope. A few things that you should know. A few, I think, very important statistics. And I think this big one, or the first one, shines a light on what I think is one of the most troubling crises that is taking place in the world today. And that is that there are 59 million children throughout the world who don't have access to an education. They are completely shut out from receiving a primary level education. So think basically between 1st and 5th grade. And this number has actually gone up since 2010. So this is a number that's from 2013. And this figure was, in 2010, it was at 53 million. It's now up to 59 million. So a whole lot of progress that the world has been making in terms of getting kids in school has stalled, and actually we've started to regress a little bit. In the part of the world where I work, in East Africa, there are about 5 million kids who are known to be out of school. However, what I would also say is that these statistics don't include places like South Sudan, places like Somalia, where there's been a lot of civil unrest, and it's very, very difficult to get accurate demographic data. So this is a pretty stark number, I think, and it's concerning that it's going in the wrong direction. Another statistic which I think is really important is that there are 250 million kids worldwide who spent about 1,000 days in class. They've been in school for 3 years, 3 academic years, and they cannot read, write, or do basic math. So I'm going to turn to you and ask you, what do you think of this? Is it something that you've heard about before? Probably not, right? This is one of those silent things that is taking place, and as I said, the numbers are going the opposite direction, but we seldom talk about it. All right, so we're going to make this really easy. The interaction part hopefully gets you involved. I'm going to ask you some very, very easy questions. If you struggle with these, I'm really concerned about your well-being, okay? So, I need a show of hands. How many of you went to and completed elementary school? I'm feeling good. All right. How many of you went to and completed middle school? You guys are amazing. Okay, this is a really smart audience. My next question, anyone want to guess?
High school.
How many of you went to and completed high school? Even better. Okay, awesome. So this is kind of what it looked like for me when I was looking at you. Okay, a lot of hands up. I don't know too many of you, but I can see that you're you're excited about the fact that you've completed all of these milestones. So I just gave you a whole bunch of statistics, and I think statistics are really important, but I also hate big numbers because they don't really mean much to us, right? You can think 250 million, and you don't have 250 million of anything. So it's really difficult to conceptualize that. So I've made it a little bit easier for you. So let's pretend that this classroom behind me of hands that are raised is a classroom in Uganda where Building Tomorrow works. If I went in and we pretended to begin with a classroom of kids in primary school, so we're going to assume that all of these kids have actually gotten into school, which is kind of an assumption, but let's just start there. And I asked everyone in this class, how many of you went to and completed primary school? We'd be left with half of those hands. Okay? And then if I asked how many of you went to and completed middle school, we'd be down to 2 hands. And if I then went on and I asked the same question about how many have gone to high school, we'd be lucky if we had 1 hand left. So you realize that those of us sitting in this room in the comfort of this awesome university in this great city, we actually have it going pretty well for us. Because we could be sitting in a room half a world away where not too many of those hands would have gone up. Now, something a little bit more troubling that I'll share with you is if we went into a primary school classroom and we talked to 3rd graders in Uganda and let's say we just administered a test. We asked them, can you read, can you write, can you do basic math? Okay. 3rd graders, out of the room of 10, we'd have 2 with their hands up. So what's that tell you about the state of affairs? Anybody want to just make a guess? Anybody want to shout out what they're thinking? Not everybody at once.
Not attending school consistently, maybe.
Okay, so we have basically an attendance problem, right? Okay. Now, if let's just assume that you're a parent, okay, and your kid has been going to school for 3 years, and they have nothing to show for it. Do you have any motivation to continue sending your kid to school? No. Why would you, right? It's a lost cause. You're asking, you're basically giving up labor that could be helping you around the house. You're giving up an opportunity to potentially make some short-term economic gains by sending your kid away. They're not going to learn anything. You keep them, right? You say it doesn't make any sense. And this is a fundamental problem that we face in the education space. The first is the access piece, right? 49% of kids in Uganda, they get into primary school and they leave it. They never graduate. They never make it all the way through essentially the equivalent of 7th grade. So we have a problem with getting kids to continue to come to class. We have a huge issue with quality. So the work that I do at Building Tomorrow is really based around those 2 things, access and quality. And I'm going to just give you a little bit of a background as to how I got into this. Why am I up here telling you about this? Hopefully this gives you some idea that there is hope out there. If this guy can get there, so can you. This is me again, back with hair. When I started working for a summer with the World Food Program. Some of you may know the name Jim Morris. Jim actually served as chief of staff for Senator Lugar when he was the mayor of Indianapolis. For 5 years, Jim Morris ran the World Food Program, which was responsible for responsible for feeding about 170 million people all over the world. And I had the chance to work there for a summer and be able to see a program that they had just pioneered, which was called the School Feeding Program. The idea was that if we gave food to kids in exchange for coming to class, we would A, get parents super excited, about sending their kids to school because they're getting something in return. And kids would be really excited because they're going to get a free meal at school. And so I, as an intern, went out there. I got to put on this fancy vest that said UN. And here I am at a place called Meeting Point Kampala, where I was introduced to this program and the impact that it was making in the lives of these kids. And at one point, these kids said to me, "Hey, we'd really like to show you where we go to school." I said, "Great, let's go." So we walked a couple blocks. Oops, my goodness, this thing is jumping the gun. All right, we walked a couple blocks, and this is where we ended up. This was the school. As you can tell, it's not in great shape. It was actually built out of a lot of old pieces of timber that had been put up. You can see at the top of the ceiling there's some holes in the siding itself. Termites are a huge issue in this part of the world, so anything that they put up within 6 months was gone and basically replaced by a cardboard sheet. And I was talking with the head teacher, and she said, we'd really like to replace the school, and we think it'll cost about $10,000 to do it. So I started thinking in my head, there's got to be some way that I could raise $10,000 and bring it back to this place. $10,000, not that much money in the grand scheme of things. So went back to William and Mary for my senior year, and in between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we launched a campaign that we called Christmas in Kampala. The idea was to basically raise those $10,000 in the 6 weeks between the two holidays from students on campus. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that downstream. But what matters here is that by the time Christmas Eve rolled around, we had raised about $45,000. And news of the work that we were doing had spread all to kind of very, very crazy places. This is, students, get this was before online giving. Okay? It gives you a little bit of a sense of the kind of time period we were working in, right? So we went from this, the school on this site. Actually, this picture was taken when we told all the kids they had to wave goodbye to their school because we were going to knock it down. And in its place is that building right there that you see. In addition to the $45,000 that we had raised, there were a lot of donors who had heard about this work, who had worked with this organization, and they gave an additional about $300,000 to complete this building that you see here. And immediately, kind of in my mind, I thought, wow, this is very cool. We had success doing this here. I wonder if we could do it elsewhere. So how many seniors are in the room? Do we have any seniors that are here? Awesome. This is the part that's really, really uplifting for you, okay? When I got ready to graduate from college, I had no job. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life, so I moved back in with my parents. Okay? And I said, you know what? I don't know what I'm going to do, but I get free laundry all day long. And I'm going to start thinking about how I might be able to take what we've done here, what we did at this place at Meeting Point Kampala, and actually turn it into something a lot bigger. And maybe do it over and over and over again. And so, essentially, the work, my goodness, this thing is so temperamental, I'm so sorry. Let's go back. Woo-hoo. Okay, so I basically said, hey, we're going to get this started, and we're going to make this happen in more than one place. And that was around the time where I met Dr. Alice. I was just trying to get people around me who didn't think I was crazy, that this actually could be done. And a long story short, 10 years later, we're still running strong. We have a team of 40 people who work for us in Uganda. We have 5 people here in the States. And as you heard, we're in the midst of an initiative to put 51,000 kids in school. So, does anyone remember the 2 things I told you we do at Building Tomorrow? Quality and access. Bingo. Someone's paying attention. All right. So this is a great example of the kind of places in which we begin our work. Okay. This is a village that's called Mabale. When I describe the kinds of places in which we bring access to education, I'm really talking about last mile communities. They're places where if we gave you directions and we gave you a map and we told you how to get there, you would still get lost. Because they're very, very difficult to find and generally take us leaving our car somewhere and walking the last little while to get to where we're going. This is a school. What you see in front of you right here, this structure is a school. How many of you went to school in a place that looks like this? Very good. This is reality for a lot of students, and the counts that I gave you earlier about the number of students who are out of school, what's really crazy to think about is that these kids are all counted as actually having a school. So in the 59 million number I gave you, the 5 million in East Africa, these kids actually don't yet show up because the government, the UN, counts that as their structure, and they're cool with it. I see a lot of you having the same reaction that I do, generally when I'm there, which is there's no way that this works. But it's really important for us when we start looking at where we're going to work, exactly what are the demographics, what's happening. So let me give you a little bit of information. When we build a school, we know that if a school is more than 2 kilometers away from a group of, basically a catchment of students, students are about 30% less likely to actually come to school because they're all walking. There's no mass transport. You get there on your own 2 feet. We also know that if you're a teacher, you're about 15% more likely to come and do your job at school if there's a latrine. If you can relieve yourself at some point during the day in a proper place, you are 15% more likely to come and do your job. Which is, again, a very, very shocking thing for us to think about, but it is what that reality looks like. In communities like this, we work to do a number of different things. We basically go through a huge needs assessment to understand what's happening in the space, and then we basically have a very strict rubric that has to be met in order for us to partner with the community. The first thing is, and I don't think that I put it on here, but the community actually has to come to us and say that they want a school to be built. One of the worst things in development is a bunch of people who get together and say they need a well, they need a school, they need a hospital, they need a clinic, whatever it is. So we wait until we actually hear from a community that says, we know about your work, and we've applied to be co-funded to do what we want to do, which is to build a school. In so doing, the community has to pledge 15,000 hours of labor to make that work happen. They have to also give us 3 acres of land on which we build the school. And then the government has to commit to paying teachers. And we'll talk a little bit about government involvement a little bit down the line, but it's really, really important for us to have that piece of the puzzle. And the last thing is that the communities have to agree to form a school management committee. I see some parents in here. How many of you were on a parent-teacher association, PTA, PTO, something like that, right? Exactly. So this is what we're asking our communities in which we work in to do, because they're extremely powerful groups and bodies of people that can really help shape the environment in which kids are learning. In exchange for all of this, we embed a community officer, a community development officer, who actually works with the community on construction technique and so forth, and actually makes sure that we're mobilizing community members to show up. And essentially what we do is we take communities, again, that look like this, and we turn them into schools that look like that. So kids now have a safe, proper, conducive learning environment. And it's something that we know is extremely important just to get kids to come to class, because you can imagine the level of pride that you now have attending this school versus the one that was there before. So one of the things too that I'll also mention about the access piece, education in this space can actually serve a lot more than have many more benefits than just kids going to school. So for instance, if we can get a girl all the way through 7th grade in a proper school, she will be 50% less likely to contract HIV over the course of her lifetime. Okay? And the other thing, which I think is really mind-boggling, think about this. Every year that a student gets in primary school will equate to 10% more in lifetime earnings for that student. So think about the difference between someone ending their career in 3rd grade versus even just 7th grade, right? That's a pretty sizable difference, especially when you're in very rural communities. So to date, we've opened 23 schools like this. We have another 9 that are slated to open in January, and we're working on, we're already planning for our 43rd school in terms of getting site designs and so forth put together. So we're well on our way to be doing a lot more of this in Uganda. Where did I put, oh, you're there. Okay, so let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay. One thing I want to tell you about on the quality side is our theory of change is that we have to actually work hand in hand with the government and bring together private and public entities to do the work that we're doing. And there's a really good reason for that. So I brought with me, I'm going to just pay people for coming to my talk right now. But you have to do something, and I'm going to ask you guys because you're the closest, okay? So I want you to take this, I want you to open that envelope, and I want you to count what's in there. And you're going to get up and tell everybody. I want you to count this, and you tell me what's in there. So, again, theory of change is that public and private work together to achieve much better results than either one could do on their own. Because we've seen multiple times in a lot of different ways that you have to have those two working side by side in order to be successful. So I'm going to go to my front row accountants. And what do you have in your Ziploc bag?
I have 6 coins and 2 bills.
Okay. You have 3,500 Ugandan shillings. You are rich. How much do you have?
93 American cents.
You have 93 American cents. Crazy thing is, those two amounts are exactly equal. Okay? And outside of the $35 that the Ugandan government spends on teacher salaries per student per year, the amount that I just gave both of them is and you can keep that. You can keep that. The amount that I just gave to both of them is equal to the amount that the Ugandan Ministry of Education gives to head teachers to provide materials per student per year. So you get 93 cents to buy any kinds of materials, books, pencils, papers, whatever you need for that student to learn the whole year. Okay. So from a quality standpoint, clearly we have some issues, right? And one of the things that continues to happen in the development space is people think that the best use of funds is to continue just putting money into these materials. And a couple of years ago, we took a step back. We started looking at what we felt was working. We said, you know what? We don't think that's the best use of our resources. So we're going to put a limit. We're going to say we're going to spend no more than $10 a student a year. How can we deploy those resources more effectively and more efficiently? And we came up with a program called, very creatively, the Building Tomorrow Fellowship. Now, seniors, again, where are you? Raise your hands. I want you to imagine that you're graduating and 7 out of 10 of your friends can't find employment at all after graduation. Okay? That's the reality in Uganda. About 70% unemployment amongst college graduates. And we looked at that and we said, this is an amazing opportunity. We've got some really, really skilled, very talented folks who probably want to make a difference in the world. Let's open this up to them and engage college graduates in basically transforming the way in which education is delivered in a lot of these rural schools. So our fellowship takes these college grads. They work with us for 2.5 years. They are, as I said, they're extremely talented folks. And their work is basically to work hand in hand with head teachers to completely change the way in which they deliver an education. Most head teachers in Uganda who've risen to be a principal have no teaching experience and then have no managerial experience. So they've been thrust into these roles to run a school, but they actually have no training to do it. And so for 2 years, our fellows work hand in hand with these fellows and invest in people. Instead of investing in books and things which are still important, we're investing in people because we believe that that's a super important key to changing the way in which education is delivered, again, especially in these very rural areas. Today, we have 20 different fellows who work with us. They're reaching 80 schools as we speak. And all of this, the fellowship program and the access piece that I've told you about, is part of what Dr. Atlas mentioned, which is an overall initiative of serving 51,000 kids. And we'll do that through the construction of 60 schools and then deploying about 150 of these Building Tomorrow Fellows all through 2019. All of that work taking place. So that's what keeps us busy. In general, from a pretty, I guess, a 30,000-foot view, this is a roughly $13 to $14 million initiative that we're taking on. And we have about 75% of that in terms of funding that's committed. And we're pretty excited about the work and the progress that we've had. There are three things that I will highlight to you that I think are challenges in this space. And I will go through them somewhat quickly and then hopefully leave some time for some questions and answers. We did this little exercise before about how many of you have been to elementary school, raise your hands. We've been to middle school, high school, great. How many of you are in college? Super. So how many years have you been getting educated? Just, yep.
Probably like 15.
15 years. Anybody else? Just give me a number. 15? 15? I know my dad went to school for a lot longer than 15 years. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay. The point of the story is education is a very long-term investment, right? I am so jealous of my friends who work in health. They call me up and say, guess what? We just had vaccinations for 600 kids. And they're done. The kids are vaccinated. They've been successful. They've been able to do what they've done, right? Boom, just like that. Or my friends who do water, who do work around water and hygiene. They say, oh, we just built a well and it serves 3,000 people. Boom, done, 3,000, just like that, okay? All of us are really great examples of the fact that education is a long-term investment. And unfortunately for us, we work and we live in a society that's increasingly becoming very fixated on short-term gains. So one of the biggest challenges that we have in this space is keeping people's attention to fund education work long enough to actually begin to make a difference. So, some trivia for you. Does anyone want to guess the amount of, in percentage, the amount of aid that goes to support education worldwide? So, $8, the percentage of $8 that goes to support education. Anybody want to take a guess? What's that? 8%. 15. Anybody in the back? How's Fisher's doing? How are we doing it back there? Yeah? Good? So we have 8, 15, what else? Anything else? Any other guesses? 1.6. Okay? Globally, 1.6% of $8 goes to support education. To give you some comparison, again, I'm going to knock on my friends in health. They're at about 15%. And the majority of funds actually goes to help in emergency situations, which makes sense. Nobody's saying that all of these things aren't important. But the point is that education as a field is drastically underfunded. Very, very much so. And more so, the way in which these fields are generally, or the way in which funding is generally given, is it's oftentimes on a 1-year, maybe 2-year basis. And again, we all said, hey, we've been in school for 12 years, 13 years, 15 years, 20 years. It's really hard to make a lot of change in that short amount of time. So I would submit that that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we face in this space. Another thing, the second challenge I would mention is, how many of you believe that education is a basic human right? Okay. Great. We lost a few people, but for the most part, we're all here. We all believe that education is a basic human right. The problem, the challenge, in a sense, is that governments have long languished in their ability, obviously, to provide a good education in the developing world. And what that has created, for better or for worse, and I think you can make an argument either way, but it's still a challenge, is the fact that basic services such as education have been privatized. And they're becoming more and more privatized. So that you can go to Uganda and find organizations and businesses who are trying to provide a low-cost education to students generally in high-density areas, so in urban areas, and try to make a profit off of delivering that service because they think that there's a better way to do it at a lower cost per unit. And this is a challenge, I think, for those of us who work in this space who have a theory of change that actually involves the government. Because what I would submit to you is that you can't actually scale and produce large-scale results and reach every kid, especially in the last mile, which you saw, without working with the government. You have to have that. You have to have that intervention. You have to have that relationship to have a successful intervention that reaches as many kids as we need to reach to make an impact. So that is a huge issue, and it's great to be pushed in some ways by private actors in the space, but it's also a danger, I think, for them to be as in the forefront as they have been. Last, I will say, this is I think a big challenge in this space, but it's also kind of I'll say, whoops, here we go. Is anyone busy yet? Because I am just watching all that. The third thing I would say is how aid is delivered in the world. Some of you, probably Dr. Alice leads you through some coursework on this, especially if you go on that trip to DC. How many of you have heard of the World Bank? Awesome. How many of you have heard of corruption? Okay, they're not kind of related, but the reason I asked you that question, okay, is because I want you to think about this. So in Uganda in 2012, the World Bank estimated that $300 million was lost. Okay? $300 million in a government budget that is largely financed by outside donors was lost. Now, just to give you a sense, we could educate the whole country for $300 million in terms of building the schools and deploying our fellows through the country. But the point is that the mechanisms that international aid continue to be delivered are very archaic. And they're so archaic that they actually hinder innovation and progress. And I'll give you an example that directly involves Building Tomorrow. If Building Tomorrow, which builds the schools that you saw at about a third to half the cost that the government pays to build the same school, we also have community involvement, as you saw. We also build them structurally to a much higher standard in terms of from an engineering standpoint. We don't have a chance to get a single dollar of any money that goes from the World Bank or the IMF or any of these multilateral donors to support that sector. So Uganda just got a $295 million grant to support primary education. And there's not a dollar of it we can touch because in order to become a contractor, you have to go through a procurement process. And that procurement process is exactly where corruption takes place and people's pockets begin to be lined. So you have to grease the skids in order to be able to win these contracts, and all of a sudden, the savings that you would have in terms of delivering your product are lost because of the amount of money that you've paid to buy people off through the process. So this creates yet another challenge, which I think we could have a whole speaker series on challenges in this space. And that is the fact that if I say corruption and I say East Africa, a lot of you probably would say, yeah, I don't want to give to anything in that part of the world because I'm afraid the money isn't going to get to where it's supposed to go. And the truth is that organizations, not just Building Tomorrow, there are hundreds of us who are working and doing great work at a local level. We can account for every dollar that we get. Corruption is not an issue with us. But the struggle is to try to work within a system where corruption is very much a part of everyday life. And trying to break the mechanisms that make that so easy is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we face. Two things that I'm going to offer to students, and we'll open it up to questions. The first is this. I think I was asked to reflect a little bit and tell you how you can get involved, how students can get involved in this sort of work. And certainly, if anybody wants to get involved in the work of Building Tomorrow, we'll talk. There's no problem. We'll get you looped in very quickly. But my challenge to you would be to find the intersection between your passion and a niche in the world that needs you. So I told you that when I got back to William & Mary, I had this task, which was to raise $10,000. And I did something that was really, really scary for me at the time. It's called math. So I thought to myself, I need $10,000. There are 5,500 students who go to my college. If everybody could raise $1.81, we could build this school. And I didn't know it at the time, but for me, the intersection of that passion and that niche in the world where I was needed was this right here. It was just saying $1.81 is all it takes to make this difference. And that's what propelled me into the work that I do today. So as students, I would challenge you to look for where that intersection is. What is it that gets you fired up, that you think is just not right? What's your moment of obligation? The minute you learn of it, you think to yourself, there's no way I can go back without doing something about this. The second thing, and the last thing I'll share with you, is what I hope will soon happen in this space, and that's the rise of the social entrepreneur. So we live in a world where people are really getting lauded and patted on the back for starting their own organizations and going out and being their own, doing their own this and their own that and so forth. And I'm going to make the radical case to you that we don't need any more of that. There are 50,000 organizations that get started a year in this country. Okay, 50,000 501c3s, and 2% of them make it past their 5th birthday. Okay, you going out and starting something on your own is not a badge of accomplishment, and it certainly isn't going to save the world by itself. Okay, but what the world really does need, and my challenge to you as students, really anybody, is the fact that those of us who are in this work, who are in this space, what we really need entrepreneurs. We need people who can come in to an established organization and still innovate, and still think outside the box, and still be creative, and most of all, be competent. Have the talent, have the skills, be able to articulate yourself to do the work that's at hand. Because, to be honest with you, as someone who runs an organization, you really don't want to deal with about 65% of the things that come across my desk every day. Because they have absolutely nothing to do with our mission, they have nothing to do with our program. But there's some really awesome opportunities in organizations like Building Tomorrow and in a lot of others where we're looking for young people who, again, are talented, who are smart, and who are passionate, who are really fired up about a cause, who can actually engage themselves in the work that needs to get done and to do it very, very well. And so I would challenge you to think about that. In a world, again, which doesn't give much credence to this notion of joining something that already exists, I think that's where the next wave is. And I think once that happens, organizations like Building Tomorrow will be able to have an even greater impact than we already are today.
Very early on, you showed a picture of a school which was simply a lot of kids sitting under trees. What do they do, having been in school like that for 3 years or so, and still do not know how to read or write or calculate?
So a lot of that goes to the quality issue and the fact that there's very little investment in the people who are leading those classes. So oftentimes you have teachers who are teachers because they didn't do well on their exams when they were in secondary school, and then they got passed on to a teacher's college and then got posted to that site. And so they're there, but they really have very minimal training. And so that's where we felt we could make the biggest impact, was actually beginning to work with the head teachers and spur them on to begin having conversations with their own teaching staffs about how they're delivering their basically what an education looks like for them in the classroom. And just to give you a sense, I mean, there are things that are as simple as, so some history in Uganda is that it was a British protectorate. So its education system is very much based in a rote memorization, very unengaging class day. So simply challenging our teachers to, in a proper school, turning desks in the form of a circle so that students can see each other and the teacher can see the students instead of just writing on the board, deliver some really incredible results just in student attendance, because they feel a lot more engaged and they're a lot more excited. The other thing is, I took that photo on a nice day. So imagine if it's raining. There are 2 rainy seasons a year. Guess what? There's no school. So even though they're technically coming and students really have a passion to be there, there are a lot of reasons why they're not learning. And we're trying to tackle, I think, some of the biggest. Yes, sir.
Kind of earlier on, you had mentioned that you don't go to the community and tell them we're building a school here, but rather you wait for them to come to you. How do these far out rural communities find you?
That's a good question. So generally that's done through a mobilization effort. We meet with district education officers. To give you a sense, a district is kind of like a county, or our equivalent of a county, and every district has someone who's in charge of education for that area. And before we work in a particular district, we meet with those officials to get their consent and essentially their stamp on whether or not they would support a school to be built in a particular community. So oftentimes, the communities that come to us are ones that the district is aware of that need a school, and they may present the opportunity to the community itself. We serve, every time we build a school, serves between 5 and 7 villages. So they probably go and say to the villages, here's an opportunity, should you want to take it up? And their application then has to go through that same district official before it comes to us and is approved. Mm-hmm. Yes?
In the villages, are you fighting with the chieftains of the various villages to get their approval so that their families will come to your schools?
Well, we don't fight with anybody, ideally. We generally find that there's a lot of support for a school to be built in a particular community. So there's a lot less. I mean, there's really no animosity. What I will say is, a couple times there have been people within the community who don't agree with what they term as development. So something nice being built in their community. But we generally find that the committees that we form, the construction committees that then become the school management committee, they're the ones that help diffuse that and help ensure that the community embraces the school. So I'd be lying if I told you that every single person in the community always supports what we're doing, because that's not the case. But there's very little, generally the people who are in high positions of leadership are the ones who actually have to endorse the work happening. So, yes?
How much planning goes into, or like how much planning happens before you can actually start building the school?
Great question. We have a department in our 40-person team in Uganda that just handles pre-construction work. There are 4 people there, and whenever there's a site that submits an application, they do 2 rounds of assessments. The first is to simply go and verify that there are kids in the area, that there isn't another school nearby, very basic things to basically clear it through its first hurdle. Then the second visit, all of our in-country staff have, this is another kind of cool Indiana connection, but they all have tablets, and they have, essentially we've created templates for them so that they can enter data on every family that they come in contact with. How many kids are living in that house, what are their ages, have they been to school, where have they been to school, basically collecting a lot of demographic information so we can verify that there's an actual need. The cool connection I mentioned is that all of that is stored in Salesforce. So, we used to work a lot with Exact Target, and then we took their platform and actually generated with Salesforce. So now, sitting in my office here downtown, I can tell you what our attendance numbers look like at a particular school, and how many of those students were going to school before, and now potentially how many new students have access to school. So the needs assessment process that we undertake is very intense, and once it passes through those two, segments, we also then have an architect on our staff who goes out to visit the site and begin doing site drawings and to make sure that we could actually support the construction of an actual school on that site. We have had several recently actually that have been in places where the soils are not basically right for us to build a foundation and go up with a school, so we've had to look for alternate sites. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. And the other piece that I didn't mention, which is probably the funniest of it all, is when someone says to us, we have 3 acres. They'll tell you, if you see that tree over there, if you go like 2 meters above it, there's another tree, and under that is where the rock is that starts our property. And then if you go that way, and right there is another branch that's kind of sticking out at a 36-degree angle. That's the other end of our property. So we actually have to verify all those things. And I would say about 4 out of 10 times what people tell us belongs to them actually does not belong to them once we get it checked. So we have to go back and find another site to work on. So it's a long process. Other questions? Yes?
What are your growth or expansion plans after 2019? Will you stay in Uganda, or plans to go to another country?
That's a really good question. I can't really think past like January. So what does 2020 look like? I don't know. What I would say is that the model that we've created, both on the access piece and both in the fellowship piece, is something that we feel can be contextualized to other places. So to give you a sense, Nigeria, not that we're don't worry, Mom, not that we're working in Nigeria yet, but there are 10 million kids in Nigeria alone that don't have access to primary school in one country. So the point I'm trying to make is that there's a huge need in other places in the world, and it doesn't mean that, so I'll give you an example. We have a blueprint which outlines basically our entire process of working with the community. It is 100 and some pages long. You can find it on our website. We're big believers in a term that a friend of mine at another organization came up with, which instead of copywriting is copylefting. We share that blueprint with anybody who wants it, who might be doing similar work in another country. Because it's probably not going to be us that's building schools in other countries, certainly in the short term. But if we can provide a resource that's worked for us, and it can work for somebody else, then take it. And that's better. So, it's not a really great answer to your question, but I think we're always looking for ways in which we can take what we've done and share it with more people so that it has a greater impact. Even if it doesn't mean that we're the ones physically doing the work on the school. Yes?
So can you talk a little bit about the college chapters that Building Tomorrow has?
I can. We have a network of about, I think, 17 now college chapters that are at campuses all across the country. And the way in which we got started as an organization was having a lot of these chapters individually supporting the construction of schools. And so we have students who get really fired up about this work, and they say, hey, this is something that I want to do. They raise their hands and say, we're going to commit to raising enough money to either build a classroom, to build half a school or an entire school. And so we have chapters at schools big and small, from everything from tiny little Davidson College just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, to down the road, UNC Chapel Hill. And they all do different events throughout the course of the year to help raise funds to support our work. So if there's anyone here who wants to start a chapter at Marion, find me after this.
Any other questions?
So what kinds of obstacles do you encounter because you operate independently of the funding from IMF and World Bank and Ugandan government?
What obstacles?
Yeah, do they throw obstacles in your way?
You know, it's funny. What I would say is, I think dealing with the government is very similar to probably dealing with the government here. It's really hard to characterize the government as a whole. So I can tell you that some of our biggest allies are government employees who are really, really fired up about what we do. They're extremely passionate, and they support us at every opportunity they get. And we wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't have that. So we're one of, just to give you a sense, we're one of, I think, maybe 2 organizations that are not UNICEF or some of the bigger UN-supported organizations that actually have a memorandum of understanding with both the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Education. And for a long time, the Ministry of Education told us, well, we don't have money to support teachers. We don't have money to support teachers. So we went and found someone in the Ministry of Finance who said, oh no, we give them the money. They have the money. And that guy, Keith, is our biggest fan. And so we went to him and we said, we need you to help us get an MOU signed. And he said, perfect, great, let's do it. And so we have this agreement, which is very rare, but it's a backbone that we can use when someone says, oh, we don't have money. We say, no, actually you do, and here's where it is. And it's a combination of tough love and finding really good allies. And that's, you know, the crazy thing is that one document took us about 2.5 years to get done. And that's the kind of the pace of work that you have to accept in this space.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to have a reception afterwards.